It is Friday, July 14th. Let's talk PlayStation. Hello everyone, welcome back to another gritty episode of LTPS. We've got more PlayStation news stories to go over as always, so let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. If you haven't just yet, make sure you claim the July PS Plus Essential Games. They're live on PSN. And this coming Tuesday on the 18th, the PS Plus Extra and Premium lineup will go live on PSN as well, and we have that lineup revealed, which is not the most mind-blowing lineup of titles. I would say this is probably on the weaker end, but that just means we've had so many good months with PS Plus Extra because there's nothing necessarily bad in here either. You know, you've got It Takes Two in there, which that was the 2021 game of the year. That game is so fun. If you've got somebody to play that game with, brother, sister, friend, cousin, whoever, couch co-op, online, it's just, we don't get games like that nowadays, so that one is worth playing. If you are living under a rock, then Undertale is always great to go into because it's pretty short too, or you can spend a lot of time with it. Also SnowRunner, I mean, people unironically love that game, right? So that's what I hear, that that one's also really fun. And I mean, let's face it, you've got SpongeBob in there, you've got My Little Pony. What's to hate in this lineup? Now for PS Plus Premium, nothing unusual with the 3 games being offered here. So the quantity is there, which is what we expect. Gravity Crash Portable on PSP, that's kind of out of left field, so cool to see that. But very appropriately, we have the first and second Twisted Metal entries on PlayStation, the original PlayStation, which I say appropriately because we have the Peacock series airing at the end of this month on the 27th, so cool to see Twisted Metal come back. That is such an OG classic PlayStation franchise that we have not had a recent entry, since the PlayStation 3 days, although we have a rumor that the franchise is coming back, which would also be lining up with this Peacock series, although I think we're not going to see that project until maybe sometime next year or something. We still don't really know. It hasn't had a formal reveal. That game is allegedly at Firesprite now, but the point is, cool to see classic Twisted Metal games coming back. Now, getting into our first story, just a quick little PSA here, but Sony and Apple have renewed their partnership to offer an Apple TV Plus trial to PS4 and PS5 owners. So if you are a new subscriber on PS4, then you can get a 3-month trial to Apple TV Plus, and you have to do this from a PS4 console. So there's that. If you're on PlayStation 5, you get a 6-month trial or extension to an existing membership. Now, if you are a new member, you'll probably have to have a credit card on file, and that's going to automatically set the auto renewal on your account settings, so just make sure you head into settings and turn that off if you want to only take advantage of the trial. But yeah, that should be live now. That deal is going to end on July 31st, so make sure you take advantage relatively soon in the coming days so you don't forget. Next up, Sony has finally confirmed the release details and pricing for the PlayStation Access controller, and so this is coming out on December 6th, 2023, so it'll be out by the end of this year, and the pricing is $89.99 USD or €89.99 Euro or £79.99 sterling. They also outlined exactly what's in the box, which again has various expansion ports, button caps and stick caps, and the pre-orders begin July 21st on PlayStation Direct and also select retailers. So good to see that this is going to be out the door by the end of this year, and the pricing, not bad. So it is comparable basically to the Xbox accessibility controller. That was really the big concern with this thing, is that for those that need it, let's make this thing a bit price sensitive, right? Especially because the way you can configure this thing is, you know, one access controller, maybe a DualSense, maybe 2 access controllers, or maybe 2 access controllers and a DualSense. And, you know, let's face it, depending on your ailment, you may need all those things, which all in could be a lot of money. So $90 for one controller, at least to me, it sounds not terrible. Lower is always better in this situation, but at the very least, we now have we know the pricing and we know when it's coming out. Moving on to our next story, and if I may reference the PS Plus Premium lineup where I said the Twisted Metal game's coming back, is awesome. We don't get many classic games released under premium, but I'm always an advocate for anything coming back and being available to a modern audience. And that's been a pretty big topic this past week. So the first thing I think we should mention is the LRG Limited Run Games showcase, where they announced a number of classic games coming back, not just them publishing physical releases, but these will be available on digital storefronts as well. But a lot of really cool stuff that they're releasing under their Carbon engine. So the Jurassic Park Classic Games Collection, that's the NES, SNES, and Game Boy games. The Gex Trilogy, so that's an old school 3D platformer that was on the PlayStation. Also Clock Tower, the original SNES version, the Japanese version that's coming over to the West now, so that's great to see. Also Tomba, so that's a very uniquely PlayStation game from back in the day, where if you want to play that, and really a lot of these games, they're not cheap, right? If you want to buy the original disc or cartridge and play it on native hardware, they were not very accessible. So it's so awesome to see them do this. Shout out to MVG over there, working on the Carbon engine, doing fantastic work. So it's just really cool to see these games recently get announced, and not just on PS4, 5, Switch release, Xbox releases, PCs. So making them available again to a modern audience. And that is the crux of the issue, because that goes into our next story, which is about a recent report that came out from the Video Game History Foundation. It was a study done on the commercial availability of games released before 2010, which they settled on that year because that's when digital distribution was really starting to take off. So, more or less they looked at all the games prior to that and found that 87% of all those games released again before 2010 are commercially unavailable today. So what you would need to do is either collect the original copies, the secondhand software and hardware, or visit a library that may have the game you want to play, which that is the thing. You can go to a library and in most cases they'll have games, or the very obvious one, emulation and piracy, which in this context, they kind of go hand in hand. But it's the ESA, the Entertainment Software Association, that's been lobbying against game preservation. So things like copyright permissions and allowing the rental of digital games, the exemptions that are used to archive and preserve other mediums, which does bypass the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, that specifically leaves out video game archiving. So this study, they're planning to use it in a 2024 copyright hearing, so hopefully the exemptions are pushed through for games, and they're included, because it's an important issue. It's something where it doesn't even have to really lean into the whole commercial availability thing. We know why the ESA is against it, and publishers and platform holders and anybody that has a vested interest in owning those games and wanting to re-release them or remaster them or put them on a subscription service. We all know why they want to have control over those properties and not make them always commercially available on PSN, Xbox, or whatever the case may be, right? It's not necessarily that, but it's also about having these things there for the future researchers, right, that want to look into video game history. This is a very young industry when you think about it compared to other mediums, right? It's not nearly that old. And the big problem that the games industry has, and they have not really tackled up until recently, maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago at this point, which is on a studio level, on a publisher by publisher case, they were not taking archiving of their own work very seriously. So when it comes to the source code, the materials and tools made to build that game from start to finish, the various builds, the marketing material, even the trailers that they contract out from different firms, all these things, they were not archiving this stuff. And so, for what is a young industry, it's going to be more and more complex for future generations to try and reference the old material and do research, right? So maybe it sounds like a boring topic, but something that really fascinates me, and I do hope we see some meaningful change. But if not, there is certainly that other angle of it, which is emulation and piracy. And that stuff is always there to save the day when it comes to making this stuff available to a modern audience. Now, one other thing we can mention on this topic is that for Square Enix, they are very much considering more remasters. What happened here was during a recent shareholder meeting, one of the shareholders it was a Q&A session, and one of the shareholders actually said they want to play more Xenogears, so they asked the company if they're going to remaster more past titles. And one board member said they weren't going to share specific info on new titles, but they did say they are considering various ideas and to look forward to forthcoming announcements. So based on, the Pixel remasters which came out, and a lot of publishers right now are doing very much just that. I am kind of surprised at the amount of games we're seeing come back, the kind of properties that I'm like, oh, okay, that's coming back? That's, totally weird, but okay, cool, like Grim Grimoire or Glover, right? Like, it's just not a bad thing. So, maybe we can see Square really dive into their library and make these, some of those classic PS2 games, and pretty much anything I would imagine is on the table for being brought back. Now, moving on to Final Fantasy XVI, this one is rather unsurprising, I think, but given the recent positive reception to the game and the initial, what appears to be sales success, it looks like they are considering DLC after all. So during a recent interview with Gamer Braves, the producer Naoki Yoshida did explain that based on player feedback, they're now considering their options with, doing more content, which they did say even prior to release that it's possible, but not something they're considering at the moment. They more or less said, based on how the game does, but I think that was always sort of a, the undertones were there is that, okay, if the game comes out and does well, you're going to want to probably monetize it further. So I think DLC is very much a possibility now, or dare I say it's certainly going to happen. Give it a year or two, I'm sure we'll see something come out for this game. Moving on to the Horizon franchise and Guerrilla Games. If you like this IP, then that's good news. And if you don't, then you might want to, I guess, not pay attention to what Guerrilla's doing for the foreseeable future, because recently during a talk at Develop Brighton, the studio director talked about the Horizon franchise and how they're going to be continuing it for a very long time, with the studio having 16 plans, quote, clicking on is how he referred to this. Now, I imagine 16 plans, that's not 16 games. It could be merchandising like the Legos, it could be the Netflix series, PlayStation productions. It could be these offshoots. It's not 16 games, I think, so just, keep that in mind. But he did touch on the Horizon multiplayer project and how it's a massive shift for the studio, almost as much as doing the first Horizon, going from a first-person shooter like Killzone to Horizon. It's the same kind of massive shift for the studio. He said, and I quote, "Building out a two-player experience is a whole new challenge for the studio." Now, that alone, I think, is a particular worth mentioning, because I don't think they've actually ever called out something that, I guess, specific. It's not a total giveaway. We saw, during the development of Zero Dawn that they played around with a number of things, as big studios do. Things get cut, like the co-op mode or, flying, right? So we see these things eventually come back. So at least it does paint, I think, a better picture of what we can expect. Now, we did have the key art leak. We had some gameplay leak of a very early build, right? So we saw the stylized look of Horizon, the multiplayer game. It's not going to be the hyper-realistic graphics that we know from Zero Dawn and Forbidden West, but even that's still quite early on, so it could look a lot different. But I think it's fair to say that, multiplayer experiences vary widely based on how many players are involved. If it's a more intimate, two-player co-op, maybe up to 4 experience, that plays and feels much different than, say, 4 players plus that may have PvE and PvP elements. But, I love the Horizon franchise. I think there's a lot of merit to exploring it, both single-player and multiplayer, so it'll be a bit until we have a formal reveal where they show a trailer for this thing. But, I think it could be something special, but we'll have to wait until they're ready to talk about it. Now, having said that, good segue to our next story, which is a recent report that came out from Nikkei about Sony increasing their R&D budget for specifically live service games, shocker, but also the extended reality space. So live service, at this point, we're all pretty well accustomed to. We know Sony's investing heavily in this space. So the total that they're looking to invest for this fiscal year is 300 billion yen, or about $2.13 billion for the games and network services segment, which that would be, for context, that's up from 271 billion yen last year. But live service, I think, is self-explanatory here. The other interesting angle is extended reality, because that's something that I think a lot of these companies are acutely aware of, and I think a lot of them are probably watching Apple right now with the Vision Pro headset, which is very much a low volume, Gen 0 product, I would argue, not even Gen 1, but Gen 0, where it's, I guess a really well-known company, right, that tends to put out very high-quality products that they usually don't enter a new marketplace until they feel they've got something that makes sense and will work long-term. And so, with Apple entering the space and many other companies, of course, still releasing AR and VR headsets, but seeing how that does and seeing where they can go, especially Sony as a big player in the entertainment space, the entertainment software space. They have a big footprint in this area, so they have a lot to gain and also a lot to lose in this area. So I think a big part of their R&D for the next few years, and really I guess the foreseeable future, is going to be just that, exploring how to bring software into this sort of PlayStation 9 era. If you remember that commercial from a long time ago with the PS2, I still think about that commercial sometimes where I'm like, are they on track to do just that, or possibly beat PlayStation 9, right? Will we have those kind of experiences before PlayStation 9 in 2070, whatever the case may be? But, some food for thought. Moving on to some Naughty Dog news, we have a company reshuffle going on, which is quite noteworthy because by the end of this year, one of the co-presidents, Evan Wells, will be retiring after 25 years with the company. Over on the Naughty Dog blog, Wells says, and I quote here, "I've seen this studio grow from hire number 14, me, during the Crash 3 days in 1998, to over 400 dogs today. Every major life milestone I can track with a Naughty Dog project. I met my wife during Crash Team Racing. We took our honeymoon after shipping Jak 2, had our first child during the E3 week when we announced Uncharted Drake's Fortune, and our second child was born right in the thick of development on The Last of Us." Neil Druckmann will remain as president and the head of creative, and then there's also a number of promotions and people getting brought in around the overall hierarchy of the leadership teams. Now, it's kind of funny going back to the, last week, right? Where I said something about, Neil, maybe he wants to, do The Last of Us Part 3 before moving on to, something else in his career, which happens for a lot of people where they're at a studio for a long time, and after one big release or ending a series or something, they either retire, try to move on to a different company, or take a sabbatical. And I guess I was saying all that with, totally forgetting that, Evan Wells is also the co-president, and he's got a lot of time at the studio as well. So I guess it was a timely manner that, he is going to be retiring. But hey, congrats to Evan. And I say that, because it is kind of a bittersweet thing, right? To maybe leave after, being with a studio for so long and not leaving right after shipping a product. So it is kind of in the middle of, I think, a lot of things going on for them right now. But still, certainly a high note, going from employee 14, as he talks about in this blog post, all the way up to, creating an empire, a massive studio with this world-renowned recognition for releasing high-caliber games well known in this industry. So, congrats to Evan, and he's had such an impact on, many of the titles that I've loved and grown to play throughout the years, and I think that speaks for... I think that's the same thing for a lot of people, right? So Evan has really left his mark on this industry and those that have played the games. Now, moving on to a sort of hot off the presses news story here, because this only happened a few hours ago, which is we may have finally caught wind of a native PS5 version for The Last of Us Part 2, because the composer for this franchise, Gustavo, I'm sure a lot of you know him, he was recently doing this interview, and the interviewer was asking about, or they were talking about his appearance in the second game, which he does have a cameo in there in Jackson. And so Gustavo immediately started talking about how he said, oh, in the new version, you can actually go up to me and ask me to play certain songs. And then he sort of immediately realizes that, oh, maybe I shouldn't be saying that, and he stops. So that is like a textbook example of how we just find out about certain projects. So, and if you remember a long time ago, this was a Tom Henderson thing where he didn't even write this as a story or anything like that, but it was just kind of I think it was a response tweet to somebody, but saying like, oh yeah, they've got a few things going on at Naughty Dog. This was before The Last of Us Part 1 was announced, that there was also an expected Part 2 director's cut style game. So, this would probably be something where they'll ship it on PC, PS5 day and date, and do a few little extra goodies, and of course bells and whistles to make it, I guess something worth maybe double dipping on. But even if you're not going to double dip, then that would be a great version to jump into. So it's actually been a bit until we've seen a director's cut or PS4 port finally get a new PS5 version. So I think this one was expected. We for a bit we're thinking maybe it's gone and not going to happen, but maybe it will, and this is one that's in the oven, and maybe we'll see it soon. Now, in other Last of Us news, the TV series is getting a ton of recognition from the Emmys, where they got 24, 25 something nominations. It's insane. Various categories. More or less all the actors are up for some kind of award. Lead actor for Pedro, lead actress for Bella, guest actors and actresses for Murray Bartlett, Lamar Johnson, Kayvon Woodard, Nick Offerman, Melanie Linsky, Storm Reed, Anna Torv. I mean, everybody and every part of the show is up for a nominee in some way, and that's really cool. But this news also came out in close proximity to SAG, the Screen Actors Guild. They're now striking with the Writers Guild of America after the negotiations fell through, I guess, again, but really it sounds like they were going nowhere. And one of the hot topics there, or the sticking point, was AI, where they were kind of like stonewalled on that topic and not really, they weren't even humoring discussions there. But that means we could have, at least in terms of PlayStation productions, a lot of things could be getting shut down and not moving at all now, because that's, Writers Guild, we've seen a lot of these production companies and studios that are, trying to work around it, right, as they like to do. But with SAG, now it's going to really be kind of nutty. Not that we're like really following this closely, but at least for PlayStation productions, which may have some spillover into SIE games, because many of those Hollywood actors do take on video game projects. Not to say this is in direct relation, but they might it might be a conflict of interest to still work with, say, SIE on video games when the parent company is Sony, and that's Sony Pictures. So there could be some issues there. But on a kind of related note, we did get a proper trailer for the Twisted Metal Peacock series, and this gives us finally like a good feel for what this show is going to be about. Again, I'm not a huge Twisted Metal fan, so I think this was something where like a lot of fans are picking it apart and trying to see all the characters and things like that, and some of the story beats that they're replicating. So seems like for a Twisted Metal fan, it could be an enjoyable watch. Looks, I don't hate it, I'll put it that way, but I'm not sure if I'm not really the one to to have their opinion be valued on this one. But the trailer is out there now for that series as well, which will be on Peacock on July, 26, 27, somewhere around there. All right, let's get into the latest update for the Microsoft ABK deal and the FTC results. A lot going on here, so we'll go in order to give you a brief update on the timeline right up until this point. So As we saw on Tuesday, July 11th, Judge Corley ruled in favor of Microsoft allowing the acquisition to close when it comes to the preliminary injunction case. They noted it was Microsoft's commitment in writing, in public, and in court to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation, also the agreements made to bring the game to Switch and other cloud gaming services, and also the FTC failed to show that this vertical merger would lessen competition and harm consumer access in totality. Now, right after that decision, Microsoft and the UK's Competition and Markets Authority agreed to a stay of litigation, meaning that they're submitting to the Competition Appeal Tribunal that they'll instead re-engage discussions and look into remedies. Now, the CMA did say at the time their decision still stands, but that discussions are in the early stages for what could be a new merger investigation. Then we saw the FTC confirm that they are indeed appealing the decision, something we weren't so sure if they would, considering they don't always appeal every case they lose, but they are appealing this one. And this also goes into a whole thing where the FTC chair, Lina Khan, was getting grilled by the Judiciary Committee on their losing streak in these cases and also the tax dollars being spent. But anyway, the most recent update is that yesterday there was a report from Bloomberg, and CNBC had something a few days earlier which appeared to be false, but Microsoft and Activision are apparently considering either a divestiture or giving up control of their cloud gaming business in the UK as a way to get the deal over the finish line before the July 18th deadline. And that is something where, you know, we've been talking about how something is going to happen very soon, because basically if they can't figure something out, then they'll have to renegotiate the entire deal, or of course have to pay the breakup fee, which it seems like that's just not even close to a possibility because they're extremely committed to getting this done. But it's that deadline. They want to get it done before the deadline. Now, things are moving so fast that I don't think there's much to say here, because the deadline is coming up very soon. So in the here and now, at this very moment, there's, you know, talks going on and theories getting thrown around that maybe this will get closed by Monday or Friday, Saturday or something. It might be very soon, but you know, I wouldn't even know. It seems like there's a lot of moving parts, and Microsoft is doing what they can, but the CMA is kind of the last roadblock here. That and the FTC now appealing, which, you know, there's a chance where with the restraining order, and if that's extended, you know, they have this window to safely get the thing closed. So, you know, there's not much to say, I think, right now. That's why we didn't do a video immediately when the FTC decision came out, because it was kind of expected, right? The FTC was making, you know, just bad arguments, and you know, the entire time it was going to be an uphill battle anyway, because Microsoft has so many talking points which they've been using during the entire process. But I think what we can safely say in the here and now, before we have a result, because I think what so many are looking forward to is that, hey, I just want to know if it's going to happen or not so we can move on. But here's the thing. You know, if it doesn't close, then okay, that's kind of a timeline where it's over. Microsoft is going to have a lot of money that they penned, you know, that they tucked away for this particular investment. So it's not like they're not going to, you know, do something else with it. So there's the retaliation discussion between Microsoft and what Sony's going to do and this and that, right? But it's not even so much that. If this is approved, which it seems like it probably will at this point, you know, then it becomes this whole other sort of thing for years to come on what they do with these IP. And, you know, not just Call of Duty, there's tons of IP that, you know, still ship normally on console that PlayStation's now going to start missing out on, right? And so it's, you know, there's consequences and benefits too, right? As we've said, right? There's a lot of things that are going to happen when it does close. So it's not the end. Although, you know, at a certain point, once we do have a result, we'll, you know, start to draw a line on when we're going to be talking about this news. It's just such a big story, right, that does relate more to Microsoft, but it very much is directly related to PlayStation as well. But for now, we'll wait for the result. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. You can follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and now announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories that I wanted to talk about with you all from this past week, and our Tuesday video was looking at the last major game room upgrade, which was more or less a giant display cabinet that is behind the camera right now that I finally had show up, and I built that, so you can check out the last sort of vlog style video that we'll have for I think a while. I don't know, now something else might be happening, I'm not sure, but for now, that's it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Panecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday. Well, you just have it so good, don't you? Yeah. Yes, you do.